Now, almost inevitably, given my very imminent now departure from government, in thinking about this speech, I've been looking back. My last visit here to the RSA was in late 2018, almost halfway through my time as First Minister. And of course, back then the UK was at the midpoint of the Brexit process, or should I say the midpoint of the Brexit process so far, as I'm not sure it is yet complete. And I had come to London that day, in addition, of course, to speaking here at the RSA, to talk about the Chequers Agreement. Does anybody still remember the Chequers Agreement? And I was also here in an attempt, turned out to be an unsuccessful, completely vain attempt, to persuade the UK government to opt for single market and customs union membership as part of a compromise approach to Brexit. Today, I'm going to be a bit more reflective, although it's less than 4.5 years since I gave that speech here in 2018. I don't think there's any doubt that for me, and I'm sure for all of us, it feels much, much longer than that. We have, of course, seen since then the UK leave the European Union. We have lived through a global pandemic, the biggest single crisis the UK has faced in the post-war period, and certainly the most difficult and challenging experience of my time as First Minister. Russia has provoked war in Europe on a scale that all of us fervently hoped we would never ever see again. And the impact of the climate and nature crises is becoming more evident and, of course, ever more urgent. Indeed, I think there's a strong case, perhaps an arguable case, for saying that the past 8.5 years have been the most volatile and eventful in the UK's post-war history. I mean, just to illustrate that in perhaps a slightly, although not entirely light-hearted way, in the just over quarter of a century between me leaving primary school and becoming Deputy First Minister of Scotland, the UK had just 3 Prime Ministers. In the 8.5 years of my time as First Minister, it's had 5 Prime Ministers. The sheer extent of that volatility, certainly for the purposes of today, presents me with something of a dilemma in contemplating a retrospective of my time in office. It means I can't possibly cover all of the various twists and turns, and you'll be very glad to know I'm not even going to attempt to do that. Instead, I want to reflect on 3 issues in particular, issues that have very often been uppermost in my mind during my years in office, issues, and certainly the 2 issues of substance that I'm going to talk about have mattered a great deal to me during my time as First Minister. But all of these are issues that I believe will continue to shape politics, not just in Scotland, but far more widely in the years to come. I'll reflect on 2 very closely interlinked issues, addressing inequality and tackling climate change. They've been central to my ambitions as First Minister, and I want to talk about what I consider to be their vital importance to our social and political future. But before I do that, I want to touch on a topic that is not so much about what we do as politicians, but how we do it. I want to make some observations on the nature of our political and public discourse, because and this is based on many years now of experience, I increasingly feel, and fear indeed, that the nature of our discourse, not just as politicians, but as a society, is undermining our ability, and not just in Scotland or even the UK, but in much of the democratic world, to address the big issues of substance that will shape our futures. Now, as an aside, I should probably acknowledge that talking about the state of political discourse might seem like a brave topic for me right now, given that my own party is in the midst of, how will I describe it, a somewhat fractious leadership election. But in fact, that actually helps to illustrate my point. I would hope it is obvious, given that I have chosen to stand down as leader of my party and First Minister of my country, that I do think this is a moment, certainly for my party after 16 years in government, to change, refresh and renew.